Welcome to another chapter of the Crown podcast. I'd like to start this chapter off with a disclaimer that we will be addressing a very sensitive topic today, and that the information shared is not to be used as medical advice, to be used in replacement of any professional support that you may be currently receiving. And if you are currently in a place where you're experiencing suicidal thoughts or need urgent support, please visit findahelpline.com to find your local crisis support wherever you are in the world. On the Crown podcast, we aim to have meaningful and helpful and actionable conversations and a home for healing. Today, we are delving into a topic that is often shrouded in silence: suicide. Our guest today is a phenomenal woman, powerful leader, and she tragically lost her husband to suicide and has since dedicated her life to suicide prevention and postvention for the bereaved. Angela is an arts professional and the presenter of BAFTA award-winning BBC One documentary, Life After Suicide. This documentary has been watched worldwide by over 5 million viewers. Angela represents the views of those bereaved by suicide and has been chair and is now ambassador of the charity Survivors of the Bereaved by Suicide, a free service that provides support to the bereaved adults across the UK. Thank you for joining us, Angela.
Thank you so much. That's quite an introduction. I'm not quite sure how to, not quite sure I can live up to all of that, but thank you so much for having me. And it's just so incredible that, your work is incredible. Your books are amazing. I just think that the way that you're holding space for people, the way that you are totally open and honest about your own experience as well is so liberating and so incredible. It sounds like you and I have been kind of mutually admiring each other's work from afar. So it's amazing for you to invite me here today. And I'm so happy to be having this conversation. Thank you so much.
It's great to have you. And I would go as far as saying you've already lived up to what I introduced you as. I couldn't say it if you hadn't done it, and it's commendable. And this is why I have you as a guest today, because the topic of suicide comes up on our social media feeds. We hear about it on Mental Health Awareness Day or Mental Health Awareness Week, and then it goes quiet. And it goes quiet for those suffering. It goes quiet for those who are feeling the effects of losing someone until the hashtag comes back again. But for many people, it doesn't go quiet for them as they are living the reality of this each day. And this really makes you think, just in general in life, how many things people go through in silence. And so today's topic is breaking the silence on suicide. And I think the best place to start this is with your story, as you have a personal story with suicide.
It's great to be speaking to you today because actually it's just 20 years since I was bereaved by suicide. And I think that, first of all, I just want to say how much has changed since I experienced my loss. And I think that things have really changed for the better, because in 2003, when my partner and the father of my two children, who were 3 and 13 at the time, when he ended his life, I mean, to describe it as shocking, it just kind of doesn't touch the sides, really. We were just a regular family. I worked in an art gallery, which is that side of my professional life now is still in the arts. And I just got my first job in the art world. And, we were in many ways exactly the same as so many families out there. We were, we'd had our first baby together at kind of just 18. And So, and then we'd had our second baby when we were 29. And then we had been together for a long time. So actually, when Mark ended his life, we were just in the middle of kind of thinking that we might not be together anymore. You know, we might think about having a break for a while. We might think about living separately for a while. And the way that we were dealing with that was through like really adult conversations and just kind of thinking about the boys and what was best for them and what was best for both of us as well. And so that was the conversation that was going on at the time. And so the day that Mark died was, again, that word shocking just doesn't kind of touch the sides, because we were trying to deal with quite a situation that lots of couples, lots of families find themselves in. We were trying to deal with it in the best way that we knew how, and without the drama, without the upset. There are days in your life that you never forget the chronology. Like, exactly what time everything happened. And for me, our last day together was something that I will never ever forget, that timeline. So I know that, I spoke, he hadn't gone to work that day, which was really unusual. And his boss had actually phoned me to say that he hadn't gone in. He was a chef and he hadn't gone into the restaurant, which was inside a hotel. And it was really unusual. And I actually was really cross with him, because I was like, we cannot afford to lose like any money right now. And I was working, he was working, the kids were at school and nursery. It was kind of one of those situations where you kind of I was really confused, like, why would you not go to work? And he hadn't been ill or anything. So for me, I was kind of feeling like I really need to speak to him, because I really need to know what's going on, because I'm really angry. And so eventually I phoned our home phone and he answered, which was 6:00. And so I spoke to him and I said, look, we'll talk about this, like, when I get home, like, why haven't you been to work? And I'm on my way home, put the kettle on, we'll talk about this when I get home, which is code for I'm really not happy. And but again, the boys were there, so it wasn't shouting or anything. And that's when he said to me that he loved me and that he was sorry. And obviously I presumed that he was apologizing for the fact that he hadn't gone to work. And but actually, as soon as I put the key in the door, I realized that he was apologizing for something different. And that was the start of it. And that was at 6:15. So in my TED talk, when I talk about 15 minutes, it's that 15 minutes that I'm talking about, not the 15 minutes that the TED talk lasts for. Anybody who knows me, anybody who knows our story, knows that the 15 minutes was that very, very short window of time between the last time I spoke to him and when I found him. So it was that 15 minutes that changed our lives forever. And so for me, when I came home to find that he'd ended his life, it was just absolutely, saying it was out the blue just, again, doesn't do it justice. It was something that was totally off the radar. And I think from that moment onwards, from that minute when I found him, we embarked on the steepest of learning curves, like me and my kids and my family and our friends and the whole community. It was just, none of us knew how to deal with it. None of us knew how to talk about it. It was just the most surreal situation. So it's kind of been a journey from there, really. And it's a journey that I'm still learning. Like, every time I have a conversation with someone, every time somebody messages me, I'm still learning about my experience and how that relates to other people's experiences of being bereaved by suicide too.
Thank you for sharing. It takes a lot of courage and bravery to be able to recount such a painful time in your life. And as you mentioned, that 15 minutes is a window between life and death, and it really makes you consider moments in our lives and maybe the things we take for granted, and assuming that you'll be able to speak to someone later or tomorrow, and that they will be well, that you will be well, in some future time. And so I really commend you for acknowledging the value of that 15 minutes. And it really kind of shines a light on awareness. Within that 15 minutes, you were not aware. And it would appear no one was aware of his human experience. And I mention social media quite a lot because it has become the driving force of dialogue and belief systems. And I think a lot has been done, a lot of work, as you mentioned, since 2003, 20 years, a lot has been done to shine a light on topics. Unfortunately, these are not just topics, they are experiences. And so the light can only stay on it for as long as it's focused on the word suicide. But for many people, a buzzword has become awareness. And the one thing I've noticed with awareness is, and this is within all things, race, gender, all types of equalities, if you're not the person experiencing it, you're quite far away from it. You can see it, but you can't relate to it or empathize with it as strongly. And so I see now there's a narrative of enough with awareness, we need action. But there's also those who feel that it's too much, the talking. And as a community, a society, maybe we've become desensitized to the word suicide until it impacts us personally. And so I just want to know from your perspective, how important do you think awareness is? And if you do think it's important, why do you think it's essential for us to continue to shine a light on?
I can't thank you enough for asking me that question, because I think you are so totally right with that. I think that I think for me, awareness in my situation, so when I reflect back on awareness, what would that actually mean for my situation? And for me, I have spent 2 decades wishing that last conversation had been different, wishing that the awareness that I have now, the awareness that I've been given by so many incredible people along my time, my journey, I wish that my awareness had been different. I wish I'd have known that Mark was in a high-risk group. He was male. The profession he was in put him in a high-risk group. The fact that we were thinking about not being together anymore put him in a high-risk group. There were so many things that I wish I'd known then that I know now. And for me, that's what awareness is. Awareness is me being really honest and saying, I wish that conversation had been different. I wish I'd have known then that if I'd have said to him, are you feeling suicidal? Or kept him on the phone, or got someone else to keep him on the phone while I drove home, or, all of those, for me, that awareness would have meant that I was aware that he was at risk. And, for me, that's what real awareness is. Real awareness is information and knowledge and shared experience that can change an outcome, can change an experience, can change, where a situation is heading. So for me, talking is absolutely essential, because that's how we share the knowledge. That's how we share the data, the scenarios, the lived experiences that mean that sometimes those 15 minutes are used differently. And I think you have totally encapsulated that by thinking about awareness, but what is the real life implication for raising that awareness? It's so that people like you and I can have conversations like this. So for me, awareness is absolutely important. It's not the only thing. It's about what comes next after awareness raising, what comes next. And that has to be the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of experiences, the change that can come from raising awareness. So for me, that's the important thing. The awareness has to come first, but then really, really quickly, the active part of that implications for that knowledge and raising awareness has to be shared in spaces like this and social media.
I mentioned it as becoming a buzzword, as there are so many of them now that, you know, if you see it too much, you can become desensitized. I think it's about then being specific with, you know, going into the word awareness and I guess finding different ways of communicating, as everyone communicates different, everyone receives things different demographics, different circumstances, and each individual person who's having this human experience feels differently. And so another word that, you know, comes up quite often is stigma. And stigma is attached to a variety of things. And so it's such a broad word. And if you see, you know, end the stigma, it doesn't speak to the individual's suffering. It speaks to almost like this imaginary enemy, but you don't know the details. You're just throwing rocks at stigma, but we don't know if that stigma is rock resistant. For example, every single stigma has a different weakness or a different strength. And so being specific. And so I've got some things here. Some of these are from people I've worked with, some of them my own personal feelings. I've made it no secret that I have had suicidal thoughts along my life, and it's something I've battled with for a very long time. But these are some of the things that I feel make it hard or have made it hard for people to speak out and reach for help. Shame of disappointing people, not wanting to be a burden,
mm-hmm.
not wanting to be seen as someone who has failed at living, not wanting someone to stop them, fear of the experienced pain not being understood, being so alone along the journey that led you to this place, and now not wanting people to care now at the end, fears of the feelings not being validated, and fear of being left alone after seeking help and speaking out. Stigmas can make people feel this way, but also the people, you know, people's experiences with their loved ones can make them feel this way. So if you are someone who's been struggling for a long time and you feel you've been screaming out for help but nobody can hear you, for some people, having, you know, a suicidal thought or idea or plan is a way of screaming out for help. Okay, can you hear me? For others, it's, I can't take it anymore. And so I just want to ask you, you know, within your works, and as you said, as you've gone along this journey, have you been met with stigmas surrounding this now that you're in this community? And what are some of them that have been reoccurring for you?
I mean, first of all, I think all of those, thank you to you and to everybody who shared those thoughts around suicide, because, you know, I think that I have heard most of that, and I have been in the really, really privileged position, and I do count it as a privilege, where people who are actively experiencing suicidal thoughts and feelings have told me about what that's like. And I think lots of what you've just said absolutely like mirrors what I've heard as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'd just like to pick up on that one about being a burden, because I think for me, quite often people will say to me that everybody around them will be better off without them. And I think in many ways, that is the thing that I hear the most, a true belief that if somebody is actively suicidal, they truly believe that everybody around them will be better off without them. And in a way, I think that is so brave to be able to say that, to voice that, to say that you truly believe that. And I think if anybody is saying that to you, even if they're saying it in a kind of jokey way, because it's almost like it's too hard to say in a serious way, we really, really need to hear that and to stop and actually ask the question, because you will get the feeling in your stomach that I'm really worried about this person. And I think from about the age of 5, we learn to push that feeling down. When we're really worried about somebody, we feel it in our stomach, like a real sense of like, oh, hang on a minute, something's not right. And so for me, it's about asking the question direct. Like, if you get that feeling in your stomach, you don't need a psychology degree to know what that is. That's you being genuinely worried about somebody. And I think it's about ignoring the stigma, ignoring the shame, ignoring the taboo around suicide, and actually just asking the question direct: are you feeling suicidal? And then we're having a straight conversation, and lots of the things that you just mentioned, lots of those thoughts and feelings actually are just addressed in that one question. Because then it's about, okay, let's have a straight conversation, let's find some help, let's kind of think about what we can do about how you're thinking and how you're feeling. Or actually, can I just listen to what you're thinking and what you're feeling? And actually being listened to properly, really seriously being listened to, I think is the greatest gift that we can give anybody else, any other human. I think when it comes to stigma, I think if you felt it, you felt it. And I've definitely felt it since I've been bereaved by suicide. The end of my TED talk is about not crossing the road, because I've physically had people crossing the road from me, because I thought it was because they didn't recognize me, because I'd had a haircut, because, you make all these excuses, don't you? Because I look different, because, maybe they just haven't got their glasses on. Maybe they just didn't see me. Absolutely, they saw me. But it's almost like, because they found it too uncomfortable, their stigma, their shame in talking about suicide, it meant that they physically crossed the road away from me and didn't have a conversation with me, and that was because of their uncomfortableness, not mine. So I think that when we have a platform like this, it's so important just to say that people like me, people like you, we felt this, we felt the shame, we felt the stigma, and actually this is what you can do about it. And not crossing the road and having direct conversations, I think, are two of the most important things that we can do, and we all have agency to do that.
You mentioned the word brave, and I think it's such a beautiful word to use. I guess for anyone who finds, at their lowest time, where they feel they have no strength left to fight, to find the courage to reach out for help, I think it is very brave. And, when we speak of stigmas, I think one of the main ones, and sometimes people don't do it, and this is the thing with stigmas and biases, you're not doing it to be mean, you're not doing it to be harmful, but the programming of what you've known and holding on to the old ways of thinking can be quite detrimental. But the languaging is very important, and although we've come a long way, suicide for many, many years has been seen as a selfish act, and it was even termed committed suicide, and people say committed suicide, and or they would say, think about how it will hurt other people, and it's seen as it's framed negatively, and it's been viewed to be fair, as a crime, a criminal act, and as opposed to the result of a range of possible illnesses or variables. And I've always had this belief that we cannot legislate the human heart and what we feel. And so it gets very, very tricky when we start to put rules around sensitive topics like this. But it is quite refreshing to see a shift in languaging. And one of them has been, instead of saying committed suicide, died by suicide, and I think that's a step in the right direction. But what do you think some of the ways of reducing some of these stigmas or breaking down some of these stigmas are? What can we do? What can our listeners do to better communicate on a topic like this?
I mean, I think committed suicide is a really big one, because I think that for lots of people who have religious belief, they may believe that committed suicide not only refers to it when it was illegal, and it was decriminalized, by the way, in like 1961. So I think committed can actually be around committing sin as well. And again, in it that you think that somebody has committed a sin in wanting to end their life, or even having suicidal thoughts, let alone kind of acting on those thoughts. I think that again just takes us into the whole kind of secrecy, not talking about things. So for me, one of the most important things that we can do, and again, I think we all have our own agency in this, is to have that conversation. You know, if you know that your uncle died by suicide and somebody says, how did they die? And actually, for the last 10 years, you've been saying they died in a car crash, then why not say, actually, I have been saying something different for a long time, but actually now I think it's really important that I'm honest, and actually he died by suicide. And then that opens a conversation, because I think for me, I thought I didn't know anybody else who'd been bereaved by suicide. And I was surrounded by people, but no one was being truthful. And then so when I stood up and said, actually, this is how Mark died, he ended his own life, it was amazing the kind of effect that had, because it just gave everyone else permission to talk about their lived experience too. And then on the back of that, like when we made the BBC film, I thought we were making a film about people bereaved by suicide. So that was what we did. And what actually happened was, on social media after the film came out, it was shown at like on BBC One at like 9 o'clock. So that in itself was challenging stigma. You know, that was like putting it on prime time, like our subject. I was amazed at how many people got in touch with me and said, thank you so much for covering this subject. Like, I am actively suicidal, and what you've done is you've not guilted me into thinking, what about your friends? What about your family? All you've given me is a view of somebody that I don't know, but given me a moment to just reflect on how I feel, you know, how other people feel. So for me, it's not about guilting anybody into saying, have you thought about your friends? Have you thought about your family? What about your kids? To think that somebody who feels suicidal has not considered all of those things is incredibly naive, because of course they've thought about the implications on their friends and their family and their kids. They've probably thought about nothing else. So for me, it's about listening in a non-judgmental way. That is the thing I think can be the opportunity to kind of challenge that stigma, really.
You know, in the example of a person who has lost somebody and doesn't want anyone to know how, I think even in there, it just shows the stigma is not always loud and a big monster. That person, by saying that person died in a different way, is also experiencing shame, maybe doubt, or worried about, you know, the outside thinking it was their fault, or that they were not strong enough or capable enough to handle the emotional intimacy between a couple or spouse. And so in that case, you know, they're trying to protect themselves, but in a roundabout way, indirect way, allowing the stigma to still exist. And so you're so right in speaking out. You will kind of see that, hey, I'm not alone. There is more support out there. And, you know, it can actually aid in breaking down some of these stigmas and ingrained beliefs that we have about certain topics and subject matters. But then on that, there is, you know, I think it's one thing to tell someone to speak out. The other is, I guess, knowing that who you're speaking to is emotionally equipped, or I don't like to say has the right words to say back, but it can be also scary because you speak to someone you care a lot about, and their response can contribute towards your next actions or how you even view your situation, good or bad. And unfortunately, some of the responses are similar to what I've mentioned earlier. You know, I know in my case, I've sat with doctors and I tried to, they ask me, you know, why do you want to die? You know, and as you said, quite frank and straight to the point. Or they try to convince me why I should want to live. And often one of the things we say back are, you know, to people who come to us in a time of need are, you know, there's a hope. Don't end your life. There's a hope. There is hope. Things will get better. But there's no guarantee of that. And so, as you said, sometimes it is best, I think in all cases, it is best to listen without judgment and trying not to invalidate their experience by deciding for them that there is hope. And so I give the example. I was sitting with a therapist, and we were talking about suicide, and he did ask me, why would you want to die? You have so much going for you. What about your family? What about your friends and all the people who need you? And I listened to him, and he's given me all of these reasons why I should stay alive, and none of them had anything to do with me. They were all to do with how they would impact somebody else, or somebody else's need, or the lack that they would have by me not being here. And I think sometimes, or in many cases, for people who are struggling with this, with suicidal thoughts, all they need is a reason for them. And other people cannot give you that. And so I wonder, actually, I was quite cheeky. My therapist knows my life story. And at the end of that dialogue, I asked him, would you want to live my life? And there was this really awkward silence. And then he looked at me in the eyes and honestly said, no. And I said to him, so why should I want to live it? And I think that's where our session ended. But I think it gave him some perspective. You know, we do not have a human right to tell somebody else whether they should live or not. It's our responsibility to listen and try to understand and empathize with their situation, and navigate them towards options that are not that option, but not condemn their option of how they're feeling. And so I just wonder for you, I know you work very much closer to this than I do. Is that approach being taken?
Thank you so much for sharing that, because for me, hearing that is just so valuable. And I think, you know, sometimes we spend a lot of time thinking about what is best for other people, instead of saying, for me, one of the most important questions for me to get the answer to, and this is a question that I constantly ask people, is tell me what helped. Tell me what made the difference. What I'm not interested in is like loads of other people saying you should do this because of this, you should do that because of this. You know, like, we're not stupid people. Like, we know intelligently, you know, where we're at, why, you know, sometimes we even know why we feel a particular way. But for me, it's having the chance to speak to people like you who've been there and lived it and might still live it now, you know, and asking the question about what helped, what made the difference, you know, because I think we can learn so much from those answers, not using that time to say to people, you should be doing this, think about your friends, think about your family, actually learning from your experience about what made the difference, what helped, you know, how can we do more of that? How can we help to enable more of that? I think is a much better way of spending our time. You know, berating somebody for not thinking about their friends or family. I'm sure you are an incredibly intelligent person. I'm sure you thought of nothing else but your friends and family and the implications of how you felt. So being patronizing to you and saying, have you not thought about your friends? Have you not thought about your family? Is such a waste of oxygen. You know, like, let's spend our time in the therapy room actually thinking about you and you know, so.
And in addition to that, for those who haven't experienced that level of pain, at that point, it's hard for you to see anything else. I've always described it as being in a dark room where your eyes are open and there's no difference. You know, at that point, it doesn't matter if people are in the room with you. You cannot see anything. You could be alone or you could be surrounded by silent people. It's still dark. And I think it's very important to have the balance, you know. So yes, there may be a hope. There may be better days ahead. But right now, that person is where they are, and it's more productive to sit with them in that dark rather than try to drag them into the light. And I think we have to find the better balance between supporting people and navigating people in the direction that's healthy for them. And so on the topic of support, what kind of support is available currently? Because 20 years have gone by. What kind of support systems are available now and are needed for people who may have suicidal thoughts?
I think for me, I'm all about how can we put the power in people's hands? How can we give them the power to access help and support? So being on waiting lists for services is so detrimental to people's health, and I understand why it's important that people can access clinical support and and medical help if that's what they need. But I'm also a great believer in really kind of empowering people to find what's good for them and what might work for them. So for me, I was part of bringing the Hub of Hope into the world. So the Hub of Hope is a free app which you can get, and there's 12,500 different organisations on there, and they are organisations that can help with things like disordered eating, addiction, suicidal thoughts and feelings, bereavement by suicide. There's a whole range of like 12,500 different organisations around the UK. And again, that's free to access. So it's things like that I'm really interested in helping to put in people's hands, put on people's phones, because that's the type of thing for me that people can find something that might work for them. It's not about me telling you what's going to work for you. It's about options, which is exactly what you've just said. And I think it's about things like that, like actually just empowering an individual to find what works for them. For other people, it'll be ringing the Samaritans or ringing Papyrus. Papyrus are a charity who will speak to people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts who are under 35, or adults who are supporting someone who's under 35. And they're taking calls from children as young as 10 who are experiencing suicidal thoughts. So there are amazing organisations out there, and I think for me that's where the awareness piece comes in. It's awareness of options, of different types of support that might be good for you. When I was bereaved by suicide, I didn't know that people who are bereaved in that way are actually in a high risk group of suicide themselves. So that's why it's so important for us to support, or for people like me to be supported who've been bereaved by suicide, because I'm in a high risk group. My children are both male and they're both under 49. So my kids are in a high risk group. So for me, it's knowing about where would I point my children in the direction of? Do you know what I mean? If it's good enough for my kids, it's good enough for you or anybody else. So that's what it's about for me. It's about how can we create moments of reflection, how like this, like our conversation today, how can we put that how can we empower people into finding what's right for them and having options on the table for where to go for help and support.
And that's so key. It's options, and it's gentle, and it's soft, and it's navigating. It's not forcing. It's not a crime, And so I think that's another thing. So although the terms and the legislations and the laws and policies have changed, it's a mindset of approach. The approach has to also change along with the stigmas and the policy changes. And so typically, there are a lot of them online. There's a lot of podcasts and documentaries about suicide. Typically, this is where the conversation usually ends. We speak about raising awareness, we speak about stigmas, and we speak about support. But one thing that's it's very, very inspirational about you is a lot of your mission it doesn't end there when the life ends. And so a word that I've seen used, you Google the word and your name comes up, is postvention. You hear supporting the bereaved and supporting spouses, but the postvention part of this, can you speak a bit about that? You mentioned being high risk because of your experience, but can you speak a bit to that and how important postvention is?
I think I love the word postvention because it's actually like active. It sounds active, like prevention, postvention, and it's basically how we actively support people bereaved by suicide. And the day before Mark died, I'd never heard it. It didn't mean anything to me. I'd barely mentioned the word suicide. So when I say it was a steep learning curve, I really mean it. And I think for me, postvention is about us not sitting back saying to people bereaved, oh, come and tell us what you need. Like, I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know which way was up. Like, I just thought if I just make sure my kids get to school and my house is clean and my kids are clean and all of this will be okay. I didn't realize that actually what I needed was to meet other people that had experienced this. And the power in that was just transformative because I thought I was the only person. So being in a postvention support group, like going into a support group anyway, was just like terrifying because it was like, I just had no idea who else was going to be in that room. I had never been to a support group in my life. It was like I was carrying my own stigma around what support groups do or who goes to them. Do you know what I mean? So I had to challenge myself and like walk into this room of like complete strangers. When I first got to the support group, they thought I was there for yoga. They were like, "Oh, you want the yoga? Oh, yeah, it's just up the road, up the corridor in the other room." And I was like, "No, no." And they were like, "Oh, you want the aromatherapy? Or that's just, And I was like, "No, no, I'm here because my partner died." And they were like, it happened to you." And I was just like, and I thought, why? So even before I walked in the room, they were already like, the people who were there were like already thinking, "Oh, it can't have happened to her. God knows why." But it was because I was 32. I looked too young for this to have happened to me. And so for me, it was about finding, other people that this had happened to. And for me, that was real postvention. It was people just sharing their lived experience, not giving anyone answers, just saying, this is how I felt. And there was a guy called Ed Schneidman, who was a psychologist, and he said that postvention is prevention for the next generation. And the reason he said that was because those bereaved by suicide are in high risk group themselves. So the postvention, how we support people like me, my kids, other people around me, my friends, my family, my community, how we support them is prevention for the next generation. And for me, that's key to all of the support work, all of the conversations is about allowing people to have that knowledge and to know that postvention, supporting people bereaved, is absolutely essential to prevention. You can't have one without the other. You can't. And it for so many years, the two things were separate. You either worked in postvention or you worked in prevention. And I think that for lots of us, we've been trying to build a bridge across those two subjects for such a long time. And I'm glad to say that I think we've achieved it. Do you know what I mean? I think people now understand why it's important that we're just honest about the way we've been bereaved, and that we have specific support for people like me. Not generic bereavement support, because there's something very specific about being
specific. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to ask you. And so again, I mentioned earlier that it's not the most helpful way to address someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts. Some of the terms, as it's being selfish, think about the people you will hurt. Although it's not the correct way to approach it, there is the word hurt and pain, it's a truth. There is a residual, effect of someone dying by suicide and the people who are left behind. For those who don't know, because postvention is not something that's had this huge media spotlight on it. It is typically raise awareness, mental health awareness, don't suffer in silence. And if someone does, in the old term, commit suicide, that's the end. Okay, we'll focus on the next person who's suicidal, but it's not the end, And so can you maybe shed a bit of light on what is it then like for the person, I guess from your experience, aftermath, and how much self-work has to happen from there, and maybe some statistics, and what kind of, I guess, potential illnesses can come from being an experience of that.
I think for me, because it happened to me and we were at the center of it, I didn't realize how many other people it had happened to. And I think sometimes, we have to know the context. we have to know the size of the issue, because otherwise it can feel like you're just in it alone. And I think it was when I realized that on average, like 6,000 people a year end their own life in the UK. So this is like a major issue, you know. So 6,000 people a year end their life, and 75% of those 6,000 are men. So when we think about the size of the problem and who, you know, you can see why lots of the resources have been aimed towards male mental health, because it's absolutely been needed. However, 25% of those people, of those 6,000, are women. And again, I'm not sure that I could tell you right now a specific support service that is specifically for women who are experiencing suicidal thoughts. I can tell you lots that are aimed at our male population. So I think there's a need there that has to be addressed. And globally, there's about 700,000 people a year globally end their own life. So this is an issue that is not about me and you. This is an issue that's huge. And if we think on average that about 135 people are impacted by every single suicide, you can see how many people are walking around us who are impacted or affected by suicide. So for me, that context is really important, because yes, there is one person who very, very tragically has ended their own life, but that has left on average 135 people who are now impacted by suicide. So that's why that postvention work, being open and honest about our experience, is so important.
And I used the word desensitized earlier, and this is another example of it. You say 6,000, and the 75%, the 25%, you know, then spouses or wives who then tragically lose their lives. That's 1,500 women, you know, and so those statistics are very important also. And I don't think it needs to be one or the other. I think both things can be true. Both sides need support. And so, as you said, there's not any one particular, you know, domain for supporting the bereaved specific to suicide. What kind of things can we do to better raise awareness for people like yourself and the countless other, you know, men and women who are left behind to deal with the pain and trauma?
I think, you know, one of the main things that we can do is to actually ask, is if you know somebody has been bereaved by suicide, actually just seeking them out, actually going to them, not waiting for them to come to you, not waiting for your phone to ring, actually going to them saying, I can't imagine how you're feeling, tell me about it. And having the time to listen to that answer. You know, maybe doing a bit of Googling before you meet somebody, knowing that you've got a phone number for the survivors of bereavement by suicide, or you've got a phone, or you've got the Hub of Hope on your phone, or you've got something there that you can actually say, actually, I care about you so much that I did a little bit of digging around before I saw you today, before we had a coffee. And actually, I don't know whether you've already heard of these support organisations, but they're free and you can go to them. And you want me to come with you? You know, like, so you're not afraid to walk into a support group. I think there's loads of stuff you can do as an individual that can mean that you are the difference. Because I think we've all got the agency to do that. We've all got the power to do that, to be the difference for someone else. And I think, you know, it was my doctor who gave me the phone number, because when I went to see her, she knew that I didn't need antidepressants or anything else. I was heartbroken and bereaved, and what I needed was to meet with somebody else that this had happened to, because otherwise it's like a really lonely road if you think you're the only one. So giving that to somebody, giving the right phone number to somebody, actually having a little look if there's bereavement support, suicide bereavement support in your area, for instance, can just be an incredible gift of kindness that you can, it doesn't cost you anything. It takes like 2 minutes of your time. For me, it's that makes the difference. those little tiny things that we can do for each other. And yeah, we can have massive national awareness campaigns, and yes, I've absolutely been part of them, and I sit on the all party parliamentary group for suicide prevention. I'm kind of playing my part, trying to play my part on the big stage, and doing lots of work around that. But those individual acts of kindness, to me, they're the things that make the difference.
I think they're so powerful. And it really brings back to the beginning of our conversation when we're speaking about awareness. We can get in the habit of just talking about the problem. But what you've just shared are solutions that we all can give. And that is, guiding people, just letting them know these are some of the options available. I think sometimes we don't even know, people would just see the Samaritans come up and think, well, I don't want to talk to them, or I've had a bad experience talking to them, so there's nothing else. And for others, the Samaritans have been great, a great lifeline. And so just giving people a range of options, as what's right for one isn't always right for the other.
And we have there's something called the Support After Suicide Partnership. And when it happened to me, there was one organisation. I didn't know any other organisation that supported people bereaved by suicide. And I was 32 and I'd just become a single parent overnight. And as well as dealing with my own grief and my own loss, and trying to understand what had happened that made Mark think that those actions happened on that day. As well as all of that, I thought there was only one organisation. And now on the Support After Suicide Partnership website, there's 111 different organisations in the UK who are available to support people bereaved by suicide. So I am so optimistic for the future, and so hopeful that if we all collectively do our little tiny bit, it can make like a massive difference, because it already is making a difference. And I just think there's so much power in that we can do that. And I don't think it's any kind of it's no coincidence that lots of the people who set up these organizations are people who've had lived experience themselves. Like lots of the support organizations have been set up by parents or individuals who've been bereaved by suicide themselves, because we know what makes a difference, and it's about giving a bit back, and I think that's how I feel about my work. Is I was helped by so many people, that for me it's about giving a bit back. But also, if one person watches the TED Talk or sees the film or listens to this podcast, if it helps one person to feel less alone, then that's okay with me. It's not about likes or views or whatever else. It's about that one person who might be the third person who's part of our conversation today. Do you know what I mean? For me, it's always about that. It's always about that one person.
You said something earlier about the 75%, I guess it's the shiny object, the easy target, I guess. It's the bigger target. And there's also kind of a trap with getting lost in the data, because there are those who are maybe in the 2% or the 1%, and you speak of this one person, and I do think a lot of young people are falling into this category, where there's a lot of pressures on them, and to adults, we know those pressures are not warranted at the age that they are. Life is quite tough and you will go through things, but to them it's the worst thing they've ever been through in their lives. And I think we previously spoke about having more people working in the health environment who have been through the diseases and illnesses and challenges that they're helping people with, to have the right level of empathy, but also how important it is to match demographics. So have young doctors help young people so they can speak the language. And so I just also wonder, as men have been highlighted as extremely high risk, as are the bereaved, what's your view on young people in this topic?
we've spent years saying to our younger generations, tell us how you feel, tell us how you think, tell us what you want. And now they're telling us about how they feel and telling us what they think and telling us what they want. And we're like, oh my God, where's this coming from? We have asked for this. We've encouraged them to talk about their thoughts and feelings since they were born, for some of them, since they said their first words. We're like, tell us how you feel, talk to us. It's okay to not be okay. And now they're telling us they're not okay. And we're like, oh, shock horror, where's this come from? Like, my 14 and 15-year-old nieces are so aware. Like, you listen to them and it's like, it's beautiful because they're telling their friends how they feel and they're telling each other. And so we've asked them to tell us, like, we've actively encouraged this, The least we can do now is have the space to listen. And I think that's totally lacking. And I totally understand that people are under pressure, and teachers and people within school settings and universities. And I totally, totally get it. But we've asked them to tell us, and now they're telling us. And the least we can do is listen. So I think that for me, if you had a young man who looked like you and thought like you, and you actually sat there and said, actually, I've experienced this too, straight away, he knows that you're not afraid of anything that he's going to say, and that he can be totally honest with you about how he's feeling. Because for me, whenever I speak to a young person, what they will do is they'll tell me a little bit about how they're feeling. And what they're doing is they're looking right in your eyes, waiting for you to panic and waiting for you to react like, oh my God, no. But actually, if you can just listen and say, okay, that's okay. I hear what you're saying, and tell me a bit about how that feels. Straight away, it's like, oh my God, they're not scared. They're not afraid. They're not like running out the door or whatever. They're actually here, and they're actually still listening. I think the power is right there, that somebody can see, they can identify with you, and you're not going anywhere. And I think the power in that is just incredible. So it's not about saying the right thing for me. It's about listening in the right way, which is a totally amazing experience to be able to give to somebody.
And speaking of listening, I'm certain, unfortunately, that someone listening today has either been in the place where they have felt suicidal, or they're currently in that space now. And then also you have people who, like yourself, are bereaved, and have lost someone very significant in their life, whether that's a partner or a child or brother, sister, or friend. And they may be in a space where, they feel there is no hope. They feel there is no support, or maybe the support they've tried hasn't worked out, and they want that last leg. They are that 15 minutes, What would your advice be to these people who may feel that way?
I think, again, for me, it's where those anonymous helplines can be so helpful, because actually you have not got to worry about what you're saying to the person on the end of the phone, and there is somebody always there who will listen. So for me, those helplines, Samaritans, Papyrus, absolutely have a place, because the person on the end of the phone is there specifically to listen to you. And so even if you feel like, I've got something terrible that I really want to say, and I can't tell my friends, I can't tell my family, I can't tell my loved ones because I love them so much, for me, it's about speaking to somebody who you don't know, somebody who, they don't have to know your name, they don't have to know anything about you. But actually, when there's a phone call going on, there's something about people listening and speaking to each other that actually strips a lot of the other stuff away. So for me, it would always be a case of, even if you feel like there's no hope at all, just give one of those people on the end of that line, just give them a chance to listen to you. because that's exactly what they're there for. That's exactly why they go to work every single day, is to listen. And they're there because they want to listen. So for me, it's about always knowing that there is someone who is ready to listen. Absolutely, there is.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's great advice, and I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability, but also your dedication to this, very real human experience that many people go through. Um, and I'd encourage all of my listeners to go and watch Angela's TED Talk. It's phenomenal. And also her incredible documentary, Life After Suicide. I'll put all of the links in the description. I thank you for your time and thank you for all that you've shared today.
No, thank you. Honestly, it's I could talk to you forever. Thank you so much for sharing some of your experience with me today, because I've certainly learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and very much appreciated. To all of our listeners, this is another chapter of the Crown podcast. Feel free to listen and re-listen and share. And I think the main takeaway today is be gentle, listen, and listen without judgment. And also know that you don't always have the answers. And it's just about listening and being present with the person who may be struggling on either side, pre or post suicide. Thank you for your attention. I know it's a heavy topic, but these things, as Angela has said, it's important that they are spoken about with sensitivity and grace. Until next time, stay blessed, and I wish you better days.